My name's Rob Skingsley. I am a systems engineer for Ciena in Europe. So the purpose of this demo is to show the controller and the integration. We'll also be looking at NETCONF and how it does network-wide transactions, how the controllers are managing the devices. And we're also going to show all of these deployments using standard Yang models. And the services, the EVPN service we are going to deploy, will do multiple ones of them, starting with the first one and then having overlapping instances sharing the same control plane architecture. From here, I'll hand it over to Sven, who will introduce the model of the demo, and then come back to me and we'll do a little bit more on the devices.
Thanks, Rob, for this. My name is Sven Wysotsky. I'm working in Nokia and the product management team for NSP. So in that demo, we will create services between two Ciena devices, PE5 and PE6, that are connected to a traffic generator so that we also can see live traffic in here. In between the two devices, we have already a running configuration for all the control plane. In this case, we are using a segment routing control plane that is used to create services that carry actually the traffic. The services we will create in the demo is virtual private wired services. So basically E-line services layer 2 point-to-point using EVPN as a technology. So in that case, we use NSP as the controller, which will carry out service orders to the two devices, create a service, we will create then more services, and finally delete the services as well. So for all the communication between the Ciena devices and NSP, we gonna use NETCONF with Yang models, and we will have a more detailed look into that later on. So let's start with the demo. I hand over back to Rob so he can show the setup, and then we will add the first service after that.
Okay, so on this screen here, we have our two devices. We have Ciena 5164 number 1, and we can see instantly that we have no BGP routes running on the network. So we're not learning any EVPN routes. We do not have any EVPN instances. Same on the other side as well. Okay. To the top left of the screen, we have some traffic flowing along the bottom here, so that as soon as we have traffic coming up, so we've got roughly 1 gig of traffic there, as soon as we bring a service up, that traffic will then start going across port 4 as well, which will be providing the segment routing link between the two nodes. Yeah, the device I said before is a 5164. It's one of Ciena's new 5G capable boxes, capable of FlexE, soft slicing, hard slicing of the network, segment routing, up to 200 gigs port speeds. Very flexible box for mid-haul, front-haul, and backhaul traffic. Right, so with that, I'll pass it back to Sven, and we'll deploy the first EVPN.
Here we have a look into NSP. What we are using for that test is we are using the intent manager to deploy the services, because there's a couple of configuration attributes that we need to send down to the node. And in that case, we want to send all of them as a single operation. If you look into the definition of that intent, we will see that a couple of Yang modules are used. So we see that there is, for example, a Ciena MEF classifier, we have a MEFFD, MEFFP, and also an EVPN model that are used to basically deploy the services. Before we're gonna start, we will have a look into the device configurator. And what we see is at the moment, there is no Ethernet segments configured at the moment on that device. So to deploy the service, so we have pre-created 3 services here, but currently they are not present in the network. They are just sitting on the intent manager in not deployed state. So if you look into the details of this service, so we can see here's PE5, here's PE6. We are creating a service called EVPN1. And in that service, we have basically the service sitting on port 1 on VLAN 3438 with a certain port MTU and a certain interface name. So if we are lucky later on, we will see the same ports, VLANs, and interface name that will appear on the actual service. At the moment, the service is not present. So we basically click now here the activate checkbox, and we basically, by updating the service now, the service will get deployed into the network. So it takes a little, because all of that at the moment here is implemented synchronously. And if I now basically refresh that screen, I can see that the first service has been deployed into the network. And with that, I hand over back to Rob.
Thanks very much, Sven. Okay, so we can now already see that traffic is starting to flow across the network. It's come straight up and we've got that 1 gig of traffic moving across that EVPN service. All right, so we can start to see the traffic coming in on the NNI ports. Down here on the bottom of that GNMI statistics, we are seeing the transmit statistics only here on the bottom. Here on the top, we've got transmit and receive options. Okay, so if we have a look at the EVPN itself, we can now see that we are learning BGP routes across that network. Okay, and in this particular use case, we will have type 1 routes for the Ethernet auto discovery. And we also have the type 4 routes, which is for the Ethernet segment auto discovery. Okay, so those are popping up on both sides over here as well. We can also look at the flow points, and we can see that flow point that Sven was talking about there, port 1 VLAN 3438, and they are using the forwarding domain of EVPWS 3438. Okay, and we have the traffic stats coming down here, and we can see the traffic is flowing. The drops were when we ran this earlier, or as it's coming up. So what the BGP has to come up before it can start forwarding traffic. Okay, from here, I'll hand it back to Sven and we'll push down a couple more instances. Now, one thing to note on the additional instances, we only have testers on port 1 and we'll be creating instances on ports 2 and 3. So we won't see traffic for the next pieces of the demo, but you will see additional BGP routes being injected across the network, both type 1 and just type 4 really. And I'll pass it back to Sven now.
As you mentioned, we have 2 more services prepared in that setup. So let's have a look into those services. So first of all, there is here a service that is defined here on, edit intent. So let's look here. So the second service basically is sitting on a different VLAN, 3439, but now on port 2. And similar ways, the last service that we have is sitting here on the 3rd port. So we will deploy both of the services now. So to make that happen, basically we go into the service definition. Currently it's not present, and we basically move it into the active state. So moving it over, and by that we are basically adding the first service. And the same we will actually do with the second service. So we go here, we basically move from not active to active. We update the service definition. And once this is done, we should have 2 more services in the network. We do the validation that we did before. So we see it from before was just a single Ethernet segment configured. We basically update the screen, and now we are reading back from the device 3 different services that should exist now. So let's look what Rob can see on the devices.
So traffic is still running on the first EVPN, so that was quite happy. And now if we look at the routes that we were getting before, we're going to see we have additional type 1 routes coming in here down the bottom. You have the 6 and the 9 coming along here, okay? So each of these services are getting themselves a new BGP label, which you can see sort of here in the middle. Okay. And if we look at the number of EVPN instances now, we have the 3 different instances that we've deployed. And we can also have a look at how these are forwarding. Now, you'll only see in the forwarding database the 1 entry, and that is because ports 2 and 3 aren't active, and therefore those routes are not going to be fully signaled across the network because it's a virtual private wire service. All right, from here, we can start to take down the services, but just as a quick visual guide, you can see here the various RPC calls coming down from NSP to the Ciena device to create each of those services. So that's EVPN number 3. You can see that. that one there. And here's the one before that, the 3439. And a little bit earlier, we did the previous one, which is 3438. Okay, and with that, I'll hand it back to Sven, and we can remove a service or two.
So we still have the 3 services active now. So let's remove one of them. We will start with, let's say, the second service. So I go into that service and I change it from active to not active. I update the service definition. And now the state actually moves over to not present. After the service is now synced into the network, Rob should see 1 service less in his setup.
We didn't take down the first service we created, so traffic is still running. We can now go up here and have a look at the EVPN instances, and we've dropped out the middle one. So before we had 3438, 3439, and 3440, and now we're missing the 3439. And again, we can have a quick look at the NETCONF RPC that was sent down, and we can see the delete message coming through here on the top. Okay, so we've torn that down here. In this case, it's a remove request for the different components of the EVPN that we need. Right, I'll hand it back to Sven. We'll drop the other 2. We'll have compare the NETCONF configurations again and come back to this in a second.
At the moment, yeah, we have basically still 2 services active. Of course, if you look into the Ethernet segments, at the moment, we have service 1 and service 3. The middle one is missing. So let's now basically delete the other services. The way we are doing it is we go into the service definition and we basically change the state to not present. I do this for the both services that are still in the network, which is EVPN 3. So I've done just this. And also I'm now moving over EVPN 1. So as a quick validation, once the synchronization is finished, I move over to the device configurator. We basically sync the screen and we see that at least from this point of view, the services have been removed already. Final confirmation should come from the nodal side. And with that, I hand over back to Rob.
So straight away, we can see the traffic has dropped, and we can compare what we had previously, which is the 2 EVPN instances. We now have none, and we have no entries in our forwarding database, and we also have no layer 2 EVPN routes being distributed across our BGP. So we've come down, we're quite clean, and you can see the 2 delete messages where we delete each of those last 2 services. It's the same on both nodes, of course. And from here, we can wrap this up and go back to Sven just to compare what he sees on his device from a NETCONF perspective.
With that, we can close the demo. Just as a summary on what we have seen in this demo, we have seen the creation of services, and in this case, more particular, EVPN services point-to-point between 2 Ciena routers, while NSP was pushing the service orders down to those nodes using NetConf and Yang as a technology. We have seen into what models have been used to make that happen. And we followed the following procedure. We deployed the service, we checked that traffic is running between the 2 nodes, and then we created more services. We deleted services at the end. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the demo and see you next time.